Welcome back to Capital H, transforming the experience for your workforce into one that's more human, one that helps your people find meaning in their work. This is a competitive advantage, and it's a tough one to beat. It's also a challenge. And part of how companies are meeting that challenge is data. Specifically, people analytics, being able to bring data and data-driven insights into their day-to-day workforce decisions, and into helping make that workforce experience more compelling and more human. These organizations are not just successful to the degree to which they implement the capabilities, the skills, the technologies, and so forth, but the degree to which they make the use of people data, this people analytics muscle, a part of their day-to-day, a part of the lifeblood of how every supervisor, every manager, every executive, and every just person in the workforce goes about their work. Today, with that eye on how do we make people analytics part of our day-to-day, we're going to pick up a conversation that we've started over the last 3 episodes. In part 1, we talked about people analytics overall. We talked about strategy, why we're doing it, how we get started. In the second episode, we dove into how we progress down that path, how we build this muscle. In today's part 3, we're going to conclude the conversation with looking into the future. How do we plan for long-term success? How do we make this part of how we operate every day? Joining me again today are my colleague, Bill Docherty. He's a managing director and a leader in Deloitte's human capital people analytics practice. Welcome back, Bill.
Hello, David.
And once again, Nicholas Garbis. He is vice president of people analytics strategy with One Model. Again, thanks so much for joining us, Nick.
Thanks, David.
Bill and Nick, over the past 2 episodes, we've covered building foundations for a strong people analytics strategy in organizations, and then beginning to execute on that strategy to create a capability. Now, for our listeners, let's turn to how this vision evolves over time. How do we ensure long-term success? Bill, I want to start with you. Give us an example of a best practice, a lesson learned. What are things that you've seen clients do that other clients would say, if only I had known that as I was getting started? Give our listeners 1 or 2 of those ahas that will ultimately end up being factors in their long-term success.
I would draw not just upon my own experience, but an even richer pool. And that's our Deloitte high impact people analytics research that we've done. And that has shown that there really are 7 key factors that consistently impact people analytics success. Given our time today, I won't discuss all these, but there are 2 factors I would like to mention. One is building data proficiency, building a common lexicon and understanding of your workforce data with all the key stakeholders. So if, David, you and I are talking about what does attrition mean? How is it measured? We're talking from the same foundational understanding. Our research shows that high-performing people analytics organizations are 20 times more likely to have strong data literacy than their peers. I think the second key factor and lesson learned we've seen working with clients is very closely related. And these high-performing organizations are very intentional about building trust and transparency in the data. They recognize that individuals will start this journey with a variety of past experiences with workforce data. And they may have existing preconceived notions on important workforce metrics that are primarily based on tribal knowledge and supposition and not sound analysis. So ensuring that all stakeholders have faith in the workforce insights that are being produced is really critically important to success. Without that foundation, it's going to be very difficult to build upon and be successful.
Nick, what would you add? We've talked a lot about the foundations here, but long-term, what separates the clients you've worked with that have found success from the rest?
It's achieving scale, which means that you don't create stuff that you then have to pour continuous resources into maintaining, that you have to make efficiencies in order to achieve more impact. You're going to need to productize a certain layer of your work, and then a deepening over time, just deeper and deeper relationships with the business is going to allow you to keep seeing the places where you can add value. There's always going to be more value that can be created through people analytics, but those relationships that you build over time, the trust that you've built over time, is what's going to unlock your ability to see those things. You have to get off the ground and then at a level of maturity, be able to continue to scale and to be able to suss out those most important business challenges.
In both of your answers, what I'm taking away is it's about creating roots in our day-to-day operations and culture. creating some common literacies. So we've got a set of tools that we're going to use to build something with that it's woven into the fabric of how the organization works. So let me bring a little bit of my own personal perspective in here. My team and I in Deloitte's Insights Action capability within our human capital practice, we focus not just on helping clients find answers, but also helping them to sense, to ask better questions, to understand what to pay attention to in the first place. And so I can imagine, given the world we're in with continuous and tremendous disruption, a lot of uncertainty about work and workforce and workplace, in this context, in this world, we may not always be able to do the big research projects which turn into hypotheses we can build research around and we can test, which then we build models that we can use to create dashboards and so forth. In that context, where does this capability that you're describing, where does it go? Where does people analytics go when it's not about building a model that it turns into a dashboard, but it's really about sensing for questions that we don't even know we need to ask yet, if that makes sense? And Nick, I'll start with you.
Have an analytics-ready data asset. And what that means is that it is not rigidly defined by today's challenges, that you build a model, a data model, and a structure and a delivery mechanism with visualization and data science that can continuously evolve into the next layers of challenges. So you have to be able to quickly create new metrics. You have to be able to quickly create new content to run new data science predictive models. If you build that right, you are in a position of maximum readiness for the changes in the business and what's going to be there. We can't anticipate everything. We can't define everything in a requirements document in advance. So we have to have a strong analytics-ready data asset and visualization and data science capabilities that we can deploy into an evolving set of business challenges.
Bill, come into this conversation. Who's using this asset? Is it being used by analysts in the people analytics function, or is this now something that might find its way into the hands of a rank and file manager or even an executive that they themselves might be using to watch?
When you talked about, first of all, this concept of sensing broader market shifts, I'd like to start there. I go back to what we talked about in one of our previous sessions around the 4 key aspects of an effective operating model, and strategy being one of those pillars. And I think we talked about the need to have a named leader really kind of driving that strategy pillar. And really what we've seen, most organizations have been effective at doing this in terms of looking externally, detecting changes in the market. How is that going to shift their priorities? It really is that individual leading that strategy pillar that should be driving that. And it's interesting, we think about the other 3 pillars, whether it be building in the right talent, your governance model, making sure you've got your insights deeply integrated with your other business processes. Those 3 are what I would call urgent. They're always ever present. Most organizations are really laser focused on driving those 3 aspects. It is the strategy area, particularly externally sensing, looking at those external signals that as we continue to evolve and drive that strategy is really important, an area where most organizations could continue to improve. The business leaders that we're working with and the rank and file you've talked about should ultimately be beneficiaries of that evolving strategy, but it's typically not expected that they're the ones actually keeping a finger on the pulse of the external market and driving that strategy.
That makes sense. Now, you talk about this sort of single owner or leader for people analytics, but I suspect there are similar single owners for how analytics are being used in other parts of the organization. Talk to me about that person's partners outside of the human capital or HR world. What are the possibilities here? Where are the partnerships that ultimately allow the whole organization to respond in a more agile way?
I think the organizations and individual leaders that we've seen be most successful, they actually think about building those relationships. They're intentional. They're proactive in terms of identifying who their peers are, driving other similar analytics responsibilities in other parts of the business, and building relationships with them and making sure that they're aligned on key strategy and technology decisions. One good example I like to use is make it very tangible is when it comes to workforce planning. For many organizations, when it comes to workforce and headcount planning, finance is very deeply involved in that. In some organizations, it might be a primarily finance-driven process. So where the data is initially set in terms of that headcount plan and how it's going to be tracked is maybe even a current finance system. Yet the actual measurement of the headcount and the need to reconcile between actuals versus planned really requires deep coordination between the finance and HR function. And we've seen many organizations where we've got strong people analytics leaders that have been focused on building those relationships. And it's allowed them to be much more effective at actually providing true cross-platform and cross-process insights.
Bill and Nick, it's time to wrap up our conversation. And I'm going to end with a look into the future. Or maybe not so much the future, because it's really here today. AI, artificial intelligence, algorithms, they're part of our teams now. They're part of our lives, whether we know it or not. They're certainly part of our human capital and people analytics teams. But unpack that a bit. What does that look like? Where are these tools and technologies showing up? What are they doing today? Where is this going? How are artificial intelligence and machine learning driving value in what we're doing? How are we staying on the right side of these technologies as they continue to augment and accelerate what we do?
There's two roles that the people analytics team is going to need to have when it comes to AI and machine learning. One of them is for the models that they're creating in the people analytics space, predictors on attrition, talent movement, time to fill on recruiting, future diversity levels, whatever these models are creating, they're going to need to manage that as a portfolio, make sure that they are using proper ethics in the development of those, and then maintaining the ethics of, is there data drift? Is it still a valid model? There's a lot of portfolio management that's needed in the advanced analytics or predictive modeling space for their own product set. They also need to be the chief consultants in the HR function for AI and ML that is being purchased and is embedded into other parts of the HR tech stack. As folks are going out to market and looking at tools, somebody with a data science capability is going to need to help them to work with those vendors to evaluate if they find those models that are embedded in those products to be acceptable. There's two roles in the AI ML space that I think people analytics is going to need to fulfill.
Let's step back, big picture. In our last conversation, Nick, you introduced a model for how clients can evaluate the impact of individual metrics. Sort of on a scale of 1 to 10, is this information in demand? Is it useful? Do we see that supervisors are coming to a dashboard every day and consuming this? So on. Bill, you've worked with lots of clients to stand up their functionalities in the people analytics space. And similarly, big picture, how do you help them to understand success? How do you help them to understand what is worth doing? Where are we actually going to drive impact? Where have we driven impact so far?
That discussion regarding what success looks like, how is it going to be measured, how is it going to be continually reported to leadership as a proof point in terms of the return on the investment they're making in this initiative? That has to be thought at the outset. And unfortunately, many organizations still are evolving in terms of thinking of that at the very beginning part of their journey. Unfortunately, it kind of gets asked as a, okay, so now what question later on? Or next thing you know, the CFO comes along and asks to justify the investments on this journey, and there's a scramble to provide those insights. So I think planning in terms of what success looks like, how it's going to be measured, and how it's going to be broadcast and shared throughout the organization should be part of the initial strategy. What we've seen is that most organizations think about measuring the value of their people analytics efforts probably through at least 3 dimensions. One is there are certain impacts that are just directly related to the workforce. It doesn't really require correlating success with other measures. A good example, many organizations may at the start say, my goal is to actually reduce attrition by 1%. Today, I have a lack of insight into why people are leaving the organization, and I actually want to address that. And as I get greater insights, I'm confident that we can actually reduce attrition. So being able to actually measure that. Another good example, actually improving the quality of hires. Many organizations may not have a real good sense of when individuals join the organization through different channels, which individuals are most successful, which ones actually stay with the organization and continue to grow and contribute. And that may be correlated to the different hiring channels. So there's one group of measurement around just the workforce. The second, I think, is actual broader business impact. Again, the most progressive organizations are actually focused on being able to tell a story that shows the value that their efforts on the workforce are actually having on broader business measures. For example, we've seen clients that have actually directly shown a correlation between the quality of their hire and reducing attrition and how that's actually lowered their overall workforce cost and actually improved their bottom line. The last category I would say is more business unit specific, where you're dealing with leaders in specific business units that have their own challenges. For example, maybe I'm an HR business partner that's actually working with our leader that drives our customer support team. Their measures are things like, how am I doing in improving first-time call resolution? How am I actually doing in improving my NPS scores with my clients? And their definition of success in their people analytics efforts is leveraging data on their workforce and gaining insight that are actually having impact on those success measures.
On that note, let's wrap up our conversation. This will close out our 3-part series on people analytics. As we've seen, driving this greater business value with our people data, providing confidence to our leaders and their abilities to make decisions about their workforce. It takes a holistic approach that involves having the right people, the right practices, and the right platforms to be able to extract the insights we need and to quickly deliver results. I want to thank our guests, Bill Docherty. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, David. I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you and Nicholas.
And Nicholas Garbis. Thank you, Nick, for joining us today.
Thanks, David. It was great to be with you. And Bill, as always, I appreciate learning from you every time we connect.
And thanks to you and the audience for joining us as well. Until next time. This podcast is produced by Deloitte. The views and opinions expressed by podcast speakers and guests are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of Deloitte. This podcast provides general information only and is not intended to constitute advice or services of any kind. For additional information about Deloitte, go to deloitte.com/about.